All right, hello everyone. Welcome to another ETR Insights panel where we convene IT decision makers from our ETR community to help tell the stories behind the data. My name is Doug Burrell, and I'm a principal research analyst here at ETR. Today we'll be centering this discussion around our recently completed SASE Observatory report, and we are lucky enough to have three, hopefully four IT leaders with us who will provide commentary on their use of SASE products. Before we begin, we'll do our standard disclaimer. Please be aware that we'll be recording today's event. The intent of the panel is for it to be an open discussion of differing views and opinions without disclosing any material non-public or confidential information. Furthermore, the opinions shared and discussed here today are our own and not necessarily those of any past or present employers. So with that out of the way, I want to welcome our three panelists. Thank you all for joining. It's going to be a great conversation coming up. If you'd like to give a brief introduction with your first name, industry, scope of your position, and maybe a quick overview of your IT security stack within your respective firms.
Yeah, happy to. My name is Matthew. I am a career CIO. I've predominantly worked in the restaurant and retail space, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Matthew.
And my name is Matt, not to be confused with Matthew. I'm also a CIO of an organization in CPG food in the Northeast. Been in this organization about 10 years and in IT about 25.
Excellent.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Eric. I'm based Northeast, SVP of Tech and Ops with Global Financial Services Institution, household name. My oversight is architecture governance, been in industry several decades. Nice to meet everyone.
Great, thank you, Eric. So maybe kind of first category of questions we kind of look at. Just generally speaking, when your organizations first began to adopt SASE or talk about adopting it, what were sort of the main drivers behind that conversation or decision?
I can go first. It's not like we actually set out and said, hey, let's go implement this SASE technology. So we had distributed wide area networks that were initially MPLS based that eventually evolved into SD-WAN type technology. A number of functions, such as the cloud-based firewall, were provided as services by providers of the SD-WAN solutions at the time. And as it evolved, these different components that ultimately came to be known as SASE were added, and we picked them up one by one as part of the environment. Now they're all deployed in our organization, and as we look at alternatives, so the replacement of our current provider, for example, then all of these components are in there and are being evaluated. As we do that evaluation, all of the vendors that are in your document, for example, are those that get mentioned. And then there's also the question of, do we outsource it? So allow the vendor to provide that as a service, or do we buy equipment like Akamai or Cisco ourselves, or allow these guys to throttle and control network performance, for example, on their own? So it wasn't like a one-off, let's just go buy this. It evolved into the network over many years. And now today, it continues to evolve as well. I'm sure there'll be another acronym in 5 years. But as things continue to evolve, these components are added into the service requirement that we have when we evaluate options in the marketplace.
Yeah, they do love their acronyms.
Yeah, I would kind of echo to a degree how this came on our radar. Exactly, it was not basically with the mandate to find best-in-class SASE. It's more like evolution of our needs, and those were basically realization that our topology is changing dramatically. So in legacy enterprise, obviously, we were very entrenched in data center, hub and spoke topology, and found ourselves in hybrid multi-cloud world, and understanding that our old kind of approach, like appliance-based approach and throwing appliances at problems would not scale operationally, frankly, and from performance and architectural perspective. So there were convergence of things happening in the marketplace, the things that industry leaders were signaling to us, and our own sort of attempt to do cyber uplift kind of came as a convergent point to towards instrumentation that now might be described as more SASE-like. So that's kind of like our journey, but it's really basically attempt to modernize our stack in very like complex and heterogeneous kind of mix. Like we have data center, cloud, colo, and edge. In our basically industry, edge is essentially ROBA, remote office branch operations, as well as just edge as like outpost type of edge and CDN. So that kind of what was the impetus for moving in that direction.
Great. It makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, and if I may, and this is Matthew. For me, really the trigger was something pretty pragmatic. Uh, the legacy network equipment that every time I've made some sort of a SASE or an SD-WAN type purchase, it's triggered by the fact that there's legacy network equipment that has reached its depreciation end and or its usability end, something to that effect, and we're forced into a decision, and then by virtue of being forced into that decision, it unlocked an opportunity to modernize in what is the current approach and to finally do that thing that candidly we've been wanting to do in each of the places I've bought it for some period of time, but we really couldn't because these devices were still on the books. So I've made a traditional network transformation to a SASE transformation 3 times in my career. All 3 times, it was because the equipment finally reached its end that allowed that to happen.
Yeah, that's an interesting point about really forcing that sort of decision node. When you kind of approach that problem, how did you sort of measure the cost versus return in sort of different solutions, either from uplifting into sort of a SASE approach versus sort of continuing on more of a legacy kind of structure?
And I'm sorry, Doug, is that question targeted to me, Matthew?
Oh, yes, yes, sorry, it is.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
Yeah,
no,
just one
no, no
follow on
problem.
what you were talking about there.
Yeah, well, that's actually that's a pretty easy argument. Uh, Once the incumbent devices are now fully depreciated, we're free to kind of go whatever direction we want to go. And by replacing what is there with a software-based solution with little to no physical hardware present, I mean, the ROI on that is tremendous. The trade-off is very, very favorable because now, as it was mentioned previously, we have options to do managed solutions. We can do uh, we can downgrade our network switches to commodity devices because the sophistication of the network management is now being handled on the software layer. So there's a lot of favorability there. It's actually a pretty easy argument to make, not to mention the fact that we're acquiring a lot more features, a lot more functionality, a better security posture, and better integration with our public cloud.
Great, great. Yeah, that actually already sort of answered my second question. So maybe Matt or Eric, similar vein. How has the adoption of the technology really changed your enterprise's network or security architectures, individually?
So for one point I would like to make, it was not ROI driven, frankly. And yeah, if you look at basically surface cost per resource, it could be very easy case to kind of justify it, rationalize it, but that was not the whole conversation. It's more like, well, of course, if you converge solution in a single pass, kind of software-defined uh, approach, you will incur a lot of savings potentially. It's more like, well, uh, are the risks mitigated properly? Is it actually scaling operationally and whatnot? So those were more of a concerns rather than, oh, well, let's try to find savings. That wasn't the conversation, even though in some cases it was opportunity to get rid of sunsetting license. But there but the whole basically realignment and restructure and organizational around this solution, it's a big conversation. So those were more of our kind of considerations. and yeah, we do have very comprehensive evaluation, basically framework, but it's more like to assess players and candidates vis-a-vis each other rather than just do ROI rationalization for going into this direction. So that's the comment I'd like to make.
Yeah, and I'll add on to that. For us also, it is purely handled as a risk mitigation approach. So we do not have to go through traditional financial justification when it comes to security-based solutions. It's really from a security perspective, IT security perspective, we're evaluating what are the risks that we're attempting to mitigate and how much risk is the company willing to take on by taking, say, option 1 versus option 2 if we're comparing 2 feature sets. And in the case of, for example, for depreciation, a lot of the equipment that we've seen is not actually bought by us. It's more provided by the supplier, and then the supplier is providing it to you almost on a lease basis. Do you need to stop to get that change there?
Vice President Technology.
Great, thank you. And we're now joined by our fourth participant on this panel. So Ankur, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself briefly, then we would appreciate that.
Sure, Eric. Hi, everyone. This is Ankur. I'm Vice President Technology for one of the financial services based out of Chicago. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And I want to stick now with sort of the vendor selection and evaluation process that we were getting to. Maybe just briefly, what vendors did you consider during your evaluation process, and how did you sort of bring them to that stage and bring them to that framework of ultimately selecting one?
And we're talking about, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
You go ahead, no, participant 2. Sorry.
No, what I was going to say is that with the services that are already provided, all the tools that already exist in our environment gives you an immediate obvious set of vendors that you're going to start with. And then how we would evaluate alternatives that are in the marketplace is most of the times we have network services or SD-WAN type services that are going to be provided by an aggregator or some form of supplier, and they are going to have preferred tools that they like to use or that they would bring to the table. At the very least, they're going to bring knowledge of what the different alternatives are in the marketplace. We would then evaluate those essentially in an RFP style approach, especially our security and networking teams are going to do that. And we would use research from organizations like, let's just take Gartner or Cisco, or somebody will provide you evaluation of themselves versus their alternatives, which doesn't just help sell Cisco, but helps you understand who else might be out there. So you can evaluate them as well when you may not have even known who they were previously. So we do collect information that way, perform an RFP or an evaluation, might meet with vendors, have them come out, meet with us. And we end up, at least in our world, of names like Broadcom, Cisco, VMware, Zscaler, Akamai. Aruba was in the mix, Palo Alto, of course. So those are the names we then come up with as our shortlist. We're going to evaluate against feature sets that is not necessary or important to us. There might be interoperability requirements, for example. The migration path cost, of course, is always a requirement, even though risk is the main thing. Cost still plays a part. And that's at least where we get our initial listing from.
Makes sense. Thank you, Matt.
Could share some of our history. So basically, we started with the broader list of just approximate consideration that included Palo Alto, Cisco, Cato Networks, VMware, Zscaler. But obviously, we could not go in depth with all of those. Some were incumbents, some were just interesting play. But we had to basically narrow down to 3 that we could realistically consider, because it's significantly, I would say, strategic choice, frankly. This particular functionality already would qualify into that. So we had to basically select based on just immediate suitability. Again, some might have actually very excellent solution, but just doesn't fit our hybrid footprint if they just cloud native and just support cloud, but no on-prem basically solution that automatically eliminates them from the running. So Prisma, Cisco, and VMware basically were the remaining choices that we went in depth. And as far as basically our basically factors for for selecting, yeah, it's kind of like supporting hybrid multi-cloud footprint and ideally agnostic around cloud. Frankly, no one actually scored ideally with the equivalency between all cloud. That's one of the things that was kind of a little bit unnerving. So it's kind of obviously uniformity and functionality across those environments and operational experience. That's what we're looking. Also pre-deployment, post-deployment capabilities, so-called day one, day zero, day one, and day two kind of support we could expect from them. Cost per resource was consideration, but it was not primary consideration. And I could go on, but I will just defer to others because, as I said, our evaluation framework is quite extensive. So that's
Great. A lot of great points there, Eric. Anyone else?
Yeah, this is Matthew speaking. So I have frankly, don't have a real sophisticated process about deciding who to consider. I basically go with firms with which I have familiarity or that I've used or owned at previous roles, or the people who work for me have. And there's so many players in the space and so many possible combinations to create a SASE platform that you almost have to arbitrarily narrow down the process somehow. So I looked at the things that I've owned before. I purchased everything through a value-added reseller. I'm not going to say that the VAR was really all that influential in deciding, but I did ask their opinion, and so that factored in. And then of course through the RFP, there are all the typical considerations. Product usability, interoperability capabilities, things like, of course, price always matters. Uh, the the preference of the team and what they wanted to work with over time. All of those things were factors ultimately in what I decided to buy.
One other thing I will throw out there real quick, since number one mentioned it, is we also generally buy everything through a VAR. So it's either going to be through a provider who's providing it as a solution, a whole service, and includes equipment as part of the service, or if we're buying ourselves, almost always through a VAR. And then we would also get insight from them. They may tell us, hey, here's this new vendor in the marketplace that you may want to consider.
Great. And
Yeah,
Matthew,
exactly. Just yeah, quick follow on that. I think that's exactly my sentiment. They're more of a companion to the process rather than a controller of it. So we may say, are you aware of some shifts in the market? Somebody who's a new entrant, maybe somebody whose reputation has slipped. What are some other clients out there doing? And that can weigh into the decision, not decisive, but weighs into it.
got it. Got it. And Matthew, I think that's a great point about it being a very crowded field and familiarity being something that you really preference. Anyone else? Do you have any specific sort of attributes, whether it's brand reputation, support, innovation from things you've either seen at conferences or experienced in the past? Did that sort of play into your decision making, and how did you assess the effectiveness of the solutions overall throughout the process?
Yeah, I would say basically what we were looking for is, as I said, like very comprehensive pre-deployment and post-deployment capabilities. So those are different things. So we broke it down into very specific functional line items, which some of them overlap in both pre and post, but some unique to each of those. We looked for actually very good implementation and execution of user interface, and I can explain why. Because when you operated in the world of very basically siloed, segmented solutions like your firewalls, your load balances, your web gateways, and you had basically experts operating those, they might have been basically comfortable with CLI, command line interface. But when we talk about converged solution like SASE and potentially realigning your organization, you have to look for a very well executed platform, right? You cannot say, well, CLI will do all the functionality, because you will bring people who potentially have no familiarity with that. So for that reason, we actually overemphasized well-executed interface, which traditionally might not be like top basically criteria for security or networking solution. And that whole basically adoption manifests kind of shift away from best of breed game, right? Where you stitch together and integrate best of breed solutions. This is understanding that this is different kind of game. That this is basically best of suite or kind of platforming approach, conversion. So you have to be very careful the ability to kind of do what we call basically now vernacular day zero, day one, day two. It's basically designing, implementing, and then ongoing support. So are they comprehensive in that regard? So that's something that we would really like focusing on.
And I can add a number of criteria there also. So I think the others had already started to touch on some of those things. But if we're getting into the detailed selection criteria that we would use, we're going to include things like whether or not it can integrate to our centralized monitoring and support tools, what the pre and post implementation support service actually looks like. So we're going to get help when we've got a problem. How quickly are updates being made, especially security updates, of course. So we have found, for example, that Cisco has lagged a number of times in providing updates for potential attack vectors that are coming in from the outside, which has caused us to have the potential to be exposed. Whereas some of the others, like I'll say Palo Alto, seem to have a much better grasp on getting things done quickly. The infrastructure, whether or not it's going to fit within the environment that we already have, or how difficult it's going to be to integrate and be compatible with the equipment that we already have in place. Even stuff that might seem dumb because we're all supposed to be technical folks, but how easy it is to use. So if it's extremely complicated and then the resources we have find it difficult to use or difficult to adapt to, sometimes impacts our ability to actually be able to make use of it. We do a number of reports on these kind of things, even things like management level reports on how much security is it providing. And what I mean by that is things like how many attacks are prevented, how much our bad traffic has been filtered out. These types of metrics are what our management likes to see, and we need to be able to accumulate them and support them. And tools like this, where we get our reports from, this is where we're getting it from. So if there's no real visibility to data coming out of the tool, then that's going to act as a big negative for us. Even just things like authentication. So is it going to work with the authentication tools that we have, or now do I have to take an extra 3 minutes because I can't remember how to get into the thing during an emergency? Then these kind of things all play into it. In total, we would probably have 60 or 70 criteria we would evaluate for these types of pieces of equipment.
Yeah, that's very enlightening. Ankur, you have your hand raised.
Yes, I just wanted to share my two additional points. Before we jump on the actual evaluation criteria, what other people have mentioned, those are great points. But we actually start with the Forrester and Gartner reports. Those are the key start to narrow down which are the players we would like to invite for the RFP process. And then we go with the case studies and also look for the various expert opinions. We do internal as well as the external consultant expertise, like big players like McKinsey, BCGs, and to help us to narrow down which is the right, what would be the right platform and tools to begin with, and then start with the overall RFP process.
Great. Now, I want to follow up on something that Matt brought up, which was that Palo Alto, which was really sort of within this observability study, our kind of top vendor that we found, various IT decision makers preferenced in it. Any experience with just their other networks security modules outside of SASE? And we hear a lot about this sort of platformization debate, especially among the larger next gen security vendors. Your CrowdStrikes, your Palo Altos. Did that factor into your decision to adopt or not adopt, and what was the experience there? And this is for anyone who sort of thought about it or come across this.
My answer is super simple, so I'll knock it out right away. Palo Alto came out as the preferred equipment provider for us without a doubt, even in other solutions such as firewalls, for example, which they're traditionally known for. Right. So in most evaluations, number one is going to be Palo Alto, and we do not select them because ultimately the overall price ends up being significantly higher than whoever our number two is. So when we take a look at those 60 criteria I mentioned, Palo Alto wins, but let's just say it's 99 out of 100. but the price is 100 units of cost. And number two, they're able to get a 97 out of 100, but their price is 50 out of 100. So you're going to choose number two, even though if the techs had their way, they would definitely choose Palo Alto. So that's been the main inhibitor behind us not choosing what we would prefer from a pure technology perspective.
That's very interesting. Matthew?
Yeah, Doug. So I'm going to take a little different tact on that. The I'm a Palo Alto customer and have been in the past. And in each of those cases, if you recall at the top, I mentioned that we phased our way into SASE and SD-WAN because we were waiting for physical equipment to depreciate. Well, as we're going through that depreciation journey, I have already purchased other Palo Alto products. Prisma Cloud, for example, firewalls for public cloud, typically. And in doing so, I'm entering into an enterprise agreement. Then, so as I progress through that timeline and approach a place where I can now go to SD-WAN and get rid of the physical devices that I have on the edge, there are advantages to expanding my spending with Palo Alto, for that matter, anybody with whom I have an enterprise agreement, because the more things you put into the enterprise agreement, the lower the per unit cost is on everything that you already have, whether it's a net new purchase or something that already exists. And so in my experiences, where I have Palo Alto at scale, otherwise, it actually makes it easier and cheaper overall for me to expand my Palo Alto purchase. Now, counterpoint to that though, if I had no Palo Alto in the enterprise and maybe I had an enterprise agreement with Cisco or with Juniper, or maybe I have a more fractured enterprise agreement landscape where I've got a little bit with Fortinet and a little bit with somebody else and so on, then I think the point about Palo Alto being problematic is very valid because they are definitely prima facie the most expensive in the space. It just depends upon where you are with your relationship with Palo Alto that decides whether it makes sense to spend more with them or not at all.
Great, thank you. Anything, Eric or Ankur on this?
I would say that the cost per resource on Palo Alto came higher than others, and it was somewhat of a concern. But not to say that we are not sensitive to cost, and there is no like a cost containment kind of mindset. But for us, that was not a deal breaker. And yeah, all things basically considered. Prisma actually came on top on the vendor scorecard, which kind of was collected in a very comprehensive way. We had actually different people from different groups actually fill in their scorecard, so to avoid any bias, because we didn't want someone with particular agenda or someone who is basically Cisco partisan, just kind of trying to skew the score. So that's why we had actually scoring done by different stakeholders. So Prisma came on top, and the cost factor basically mitigated by the consideration that we could basically entrust them to given potentially bigger mandate in that what they're capable of, and eventually displacing some incumbents, like for example in email like inbound email controls. It's not going to replace like Proofpoint or anything, but it can replace some of their modules and expenses from incumbents eventually. So that's how it's going to be to some degree mitigated. And again, we've taken their basically their vision and roadmap of actually stopping, or not stopping, but at least containing the appliance proliferation as also potential basically mitigating factor, even though the solution itself is quite pricey. So we kind of had to bite the bullet. And the others that we're kind of in a close running with Umbrella from Cisco and even VMware, and it's kind of in retrospect, it's quite fortunate that we didn't select VMware, but we were very intrigued because of we on Horizon, the whole VDI VPN conversation was also part of kind of whether this is good vantage point for effective SASE basically solution. That was one of the thought that we had. Anyway, so but we had history with Palo Alto, kind of satisfactory scorecards. We had subscription for Wildfire on threat intelligence and next gen firewalls. So we had kind of good track record with them. So all of that played a role.
Great. Great. I'd love to move along to the implementation and integration side of the process. So, from RFP to going sort of live for the solution, how long did it fully take to implement your choices? And did you have any unique challenges sort of integrating that with your existing network and security infrastructures, moving to a software-based solution?
Our most recent implementation took about 15 months, but there was very specific extenuating circumstance, which was at the same time we were switching over the wide area network provider. The last mile provider at we have 10 locations in total, but the last mile provider at 2 of the locations discovered that they did not have fiber in place. So the previous provider was not willing to share their fiber. So we ended up with over a year of delay to get fiber installed in both instances because they had to get permits to cross rail tracks. So if we were just switching out hardware and not switching out the SD-WAN and wide area network at the same time, we would generally have expected it to take about 6 months to switch out everything that we have in our environment, maybe even a little less.
Great. Matthew?
Yeah, I think that's a great call out, that there are so many external factors that influence deployment times. So as I indicated, I've done this 3 times throughout my career. One time took almost a year, but that had to do with the fact that it was an international deployment, a very large geography. So there was a lot of logistics challenges about executing that. Also, third-party connectivity. In my case, typically I've done that with broadband, and broadband deployment can take 30 days and it can take 4 months for a given location. Just totally depends. So all those things kind of influence the duration of the deployment. And I think it's pretty hard to say that there's like a standard deployment duration for something like this. Just too many variables.
I would say one of the sort of challenges we faced, that actually I mentioned it before, lack of uniformity between basically cloud deployments. We are multi-cloud, so we in AWS, Azure, and GCP, kind of in this order in terms of footprint scale. And what we found out that actually their implementation was not uniform across those, which was kind of significant sort of challenge, and it had to kind of some of the rollout had to be delayed. So overall, it was like more than 2 years, but over time they kind of normalized to a degree. Some other compatibility issue with Ansible, OpenShift came to surface. They were resolved, so not to say that they were massive problems, but nevertheless they kind of led to this being more protracted than it would have been otherwise. So that's our experience.
Great. Yeah, certainly a lot of idiosyncrasies and no one size fits all answer. Very, very organization dependent. But another challenge we hear sort of from a human capital perspective is about this global talent shortage within the industry. Has the implementation of SASE changed the roles or responsibilities, or potentially alleviated some of the pressures from that?
The theory says yes, but in practicality, our finding is no. So what we have found is that when we have a dependence upon somebody else, again, somebody often providing a service to us, is that they are not terribly responsive. Whereas we might find an error or a reconfiguration, or we've got a firewall change that we need to make at 3 a.m. If we log a ticket 12 hours later, maybe somebody gets back to us. Whereas if we were doing it ourselves, my techs would say I could have done that in 5 minutes. What they don't obviously consider always is that if you want to have 24/7 support, somebody actually needs to be awake 24/7. So maybe I've got two folks in house that are doing it and they will complain like this. But the vendor, like an Akamai or a Palo Alto, they always have somebody who's going to be there. Whether or not you can get to them quick enough, and then secondly, get somebody that knows what they're doing would be a second question. We have also run into instances where the tech we get on the phone does not know what they're doing. So they might bumble with it for a little bit, and then they eventually escalate it to somebody who does, and they can help us solve these things. But what our summary is right now is my internal team feels that the outside support that they're getting for these services has not mitigated the need for internal resources. In fact, they feel quite the reverse, is that they would like to add additional resources to complement what's being provided from the outside due to relatively poor service. Even to the point where they would like to insource some of these things, like the SD-WAN configuration and the routing that's handled by that. So, but in theory, if we're looking at the marketing papers and maybe others' experiences are different, we have found that it has not reduced the need for work, for our labor hours rather. But what we have found as an issue is the ability to hire people in-house who do have this skill set. They can often be very expensive. These security type resources, firewall configuration, even switching and routing seems to be hard to come by. Which has made it difficult for us to be as responsive as we would like to be.
That's a great perspective, and certainly a different story from what you see in some sort of marketing material. Anyone else?
I kind of can guess why market material drives at that point, because our story not dissimilar from Matt, right? Description, and it primarily is just kind of managing risk and basically minimizing disruption, right? This is disruptive enough, so basically going through organizational realignment and breaking silos would be a bit too disruptive, frankly, even though I think that's the ultimate end goal. And basically, and I'm not speaking for basically for the firm here, but in my opinion, the whole thesis for SASE in the long run will fail if it will not assist basically organizational realignment eventually down the road. Because one way to look at it says, well, I will not let tool dictate how I will basically put together my organization. In another kind of spectrum, you could say, well, this tool really basically revolutionized how we basically do things and how we basically structure our support around this. Because if you don't go this way, you could basically we would still have switchboard operators, right? We like notion now is ridiculous, right? That to have switchboard operators, but we don't have them because tooling and technology basically eliminated them. So if SASE doesn't advance in that direction, I think it will be a failure, essentially. That's my opinion. But in the immediate term, yeah, it is too risky and it's controversial. You have basically question who will own it, right? Is it like NOC? Is it SOC? Or is it Sec DevOps, actually, even? Maybe it's a little bit too far-fetched. But the question of ownership of that is still unclear. So for time being, we don't break things. We try not to break things. And that's just basically kind of like state of things as of now. But I expect it to change, actually.
Great. All right, yeah, if there's nothing else, we'd love to move on to sort of individual features and functionalities. So any that you find particularly essential or valuable, whether it's zero trust network access, whether it's sort of a data protection side, whether it's the threat piece, or do you sort of view it as the complete package? And then the kind of inverse of that, any features that you feel are sort of lacking or could be improved upon within your respective solutions?
Yeah, Doug, just a quick comment on that. I don't think there's any one particular feature that I say is like decisive in the decision that I would make. I think you mentioned it. It's like, do I look at it holistically? And the answer is I do. It's been my experience. It's very easy to you can find differentiations one product to another and say this performs a little bit better, in this area, a little bit better in that area, not as well in this area. But ultimately, the value proposition for me is a singular holistic solution that is easy to administer, easy to use, and is something that will be accepted by the technology and security staff that we have. So I tend to start there when I think about it. And then really, it's possible. There have been a couple of times where there was a particular feature differentiation that really disqualified somebody. And if the team was really fixated on that point, I would take it into serious consideration. But ultimately, I take a holistic view.
Great. Thank you, Matthew.
I don't have personally at my knowledge level anyways, I don't have a list of, hey, here's 100 very specific technical features that I'd be looking for. My technical team may have such a thing. But what we do look at, and especially as it renews, so something is changing or upgrading or being renewed, is what we tend to focus on is all the gripes we have for the current system. So we forget all the things that are working fine. We look at all the stuff where we say, hey, this current vendor sucks. They're not doing this. Like I'll use my example again, where right now we have issues with Cisco being very lagged in providing updates for some of their security-based tools. So we're very focused on how quickly do I get updates, especially after the CrowdStrike thing too. So then we're worried about, hey, are we going to get an update so fast that nobody has tested it? And now we're worried about these. So we tend to focus more on the delta from what we currently have to what the next thing will be. And invariably, we forget something that's working perfectly fine. And then the next solution that we've picked has a gap in that area. But we do have a running list of these are the things that we're going to need. But we would tend to be using that as part of that same list of things we're using when we're evaluating what the alternate products would be.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Anyone else on the features question?
Yeah, I think Prisma does deliver effective protection on number of sort of NIST-based controls, if you will. Basically, obviously, they're like firewall as a service, like DNS security, secure web gateway, DLP. We kind of extend into DLP, although initially it wasn't part of the coverage. Clean pipe. Some of zero trust. Again, zero trust is one of those things that kind of people kind of lump together, but it's not like specifically defined set of functionality. But some of those controls are done through Prisma, although not fully. So I would not say, well, we fully count on Prisma to do all of those controls, all of the pillars of zero trust. But overall, it's a good set. It's kind of interesting. I feel a little bit vindicated for not going with Umbrella from what I'm hearing here, but because we were thinking, well, they acquired Splunk, which is our SIEM. So we kind of were wondering, would have given us maybe a little bit better integration sort of posture, but sounds like on efficacy we went in the right direction. So.
Great, thank you. So we have a little under 10 minutes remaining. So I'd love to move towards talking about future planning and strategy. Maybe briefly, how would you summarize the sort of overall value that the technology has brought your organization so far? And in part two, how do you anticipate your needs evolving over the next few years?
Yeah, Doug, I'll take a brief swing at that first. In terms of like how I see things evolving in the future, candidly, I don't think there's going to be a lot of evolution. Let's say if we were having this conversation in the year 2030, I think SASE is going to look a lot like it does now. However, if there is a difference, it will be AI integration. So the platform itself will effectively do what it does and be made up of the same components it does. But I expect AI to have a significant role in what it looks like in the go forward.
Great. Very interesting point on that. Anyone
In
else?
the marketplace, at least what I would guess is like one of the other participants just a moment ago had said that there are a ton of vendors who are in this marketplace and a lot of seemingly smaller companies, even startups. that just want to get bought out. So I think what will continue to happen, as has happened in other areas, like again switching and other technology years ago, is it will all consolidate down. So some of these vendors that are out there that are providing niche solutions or part of a best of breed solution that gets you to this ultimate place will either disappear or be bought out or be eliminated by someone like a Cisco who buys them out just to get rid of them. So we will see some of this. I don't use a lot of the niche vendors. The small vendors, I tend to stick mainstream. But I think a lot of that is going to take place. And as security breaches and so forth continue to get worse, unless you've got a ton of money behind you to be able to keep up to date and stay ahead of all of the security issues that are continuing to develop, you're not going to be able to survive anyway. You take one bad event and you're going to disappear. CrowdStrike obviously got away with it, but it's going to result in the changes to things like legal agreements and contracts where you have liability on what happens if your service fails. So I think the whole thing is going to collapse and people are going to be looking more for single vendors who can provide the complete solution, and they're big enough to be able to stand behind their product.
Yeah,
that would be the biggest thing I think is going to happen out there.
Eric or Ankur, anything you want to add on that?
I mean, it's kind of easy to echo that probably AI will be the power engine for some kind of differentiation, because it sounds like now, it looks like that now it's going towards some kind of harmonization and commoditization of this space. So AI really probably will be sort of the battlefield for having some edge, more effective anomaly detection, maybe better form resolution, because currently like wired and wireless are still different world, so there is still all of the talk about sort of unifying and dealing with the distributed topology, but the wired and wireless are still operating kind of different domains. So very kind of poor form factor resolution for this solution. So probably this is something they would need to kind of mitigate. I think geo proximity and geo proximity intelligence probably also has some potential for improvement and maybe differentiation. And what I mean by this, some of those controls, they're not necessarily the same depending on where it's deployed, right? So it's not like you have that version of this SDN and deploy anywhere in the world and you're golden. It doesn't work this way. Because in one place, you need to send logs locally, and another place you cannot, you could send them elsewhere. So this type of things still might not be quite seamless. Other than that, yeah, I think sort of the run books and patching and updates could be more intelligent. Again, harnessing AI. So I think that's probably where we'll see this solution trying to go to.
Great. Yeah, the AI piece is very interesting, both from a threat side as well as the product side as well. And we'd love to dive into that, but unfortunately, we're running up against time. So maybe we could wrap this. There's a ton of great industry experience on this panel. Maybe if you could, if we could go around maybe a minute or less, what advice would you give to other CIOs or CISOs about to undergo their first transition to SASE, and what would sort of optimize or make it as painless as possible?
I'd say the very first thing is back to the first question that you had asked, and making sure that you actually understand what it is that's out there in the marketplace. And of course, as always, what it is that you're actually trying to solve for. So if you don't understand what your requirement is, it's going to be extremely difficult to be able to then go back and evaluate what products in the marketplace are best going to be able to suit what it is that you're doing. And then if you're not familiar with what the different products are capable of doing out there, like what's the difference between Cisco and Palo Alto or Zscaler or any of these other products, then again, you're probably going to end up making a bad decision, or just say, I'll pick Palo Alto because everyone loves it the best. So I think it's really understanding what problem you're tackling. Make sure you're evaluating for the correct criteria, and then make sure you're making a good selection that's best suited for your company instead of what's easy and just reading the Gartner article.
Great. I think that makes a lot of sense. Matthew, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, and by the way, I think that's a terrific comment, and my mind is of a similar similar thinking. The uh, I think the most important consideration is your organization in the right time and place to make this transformation? Is your enterprise ready to make the transformation? Do you have a staff and a team that is capable of capitalizing on the value? And have you fully depreciated and reached the end of life with the devices and the equipment that you already have? If all of those boxes gets checked, then the time and the place is right. If instead you are talking to a lot of your colleagues and they're all going to SASE and SD-WAN, and you feel like, well, I just kind of need to do this too because that's what everybody else is doing, so to speak. That's what I've heard and read will make us a more modern enterprise. The ROI may not be there in your given situation. So make sure you understand where you are, understand your own ROI statement, and make sure that you're ready to actually make the transformation.
Great, thank you. Eric or Ankur?
I would chime in, and of course it's hard to add to this great comments and insights because I totally agree with those. So my advice would be to really kind of assess what your architectural footprint and operating model now, where you want to go, what is your target state, and from that you might start picking best fit for where you are, where you're going, and what solution out there is actually best fit. It's not like, well, I picked the top from Gartner list and that's it. It's not how it will work. And yeah, and pretty much sort of like acknowledge how aggressive you want to be or how basically maybe cautious and conservative you want to be with the organizational realignment that this might enable potentially. Do you want to keep basically switchboard operators, or you kind of ambitious enough to completely reimagine that? So that's the question that executives will have to ask when they consider the solutions.
Great. And then Ankur, tough to follow up those three, but anything else you want to add before we wrap this?
Yeah, all great points. Just want to add, all CTOs should also look from the compliance and regulatory requirements perspective as well. Depending on the industry, you need to show that the product meets your need on those front.
Great, great. Well, gentlemen, this has been very interesting for me. I've personally learned a lot, and I think our clients will as well. So I want to thank you again for being here today, and have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doug.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Goodbye.